So I'm going through the parts of an economic model, and there's really 5 parts. 3 of those are variable types: the choice variable, exogenous variable, and endogenous variable. And then there's the objective function and constraint. So to do this, let's first go through a simple example of a student, and there's always a perspective when you think of a model. There's somebody who's making the decision, and a model is always of a particular decision. So the decision is what choice will they make for their choice variable. That's our first part of our model. Our choice variable always appears underneath the maximization sign. In this case, it's the student deciding how much time to spend studying. And what are they maximizing? They're maximizing their objective function. In this case, their objective is grades minus opportunity cost, so benefit minus cost. And then we have our choice variable inside each of those terms so that time spent studying influences grades and time spent studying influences opportunity cost. And then we have these other variables, the exogenous variables, that are going to attenuate grades and opportunity cost. So that is our choice variable, time spent studying. Our exogenous variables, the key with exogenous variables is that they come in from the outside and they are not at all influenced by our choice variable. Here our choice variable is time spent studying, and a person's intelligence, their inherent intelligence, is not influenced by the time spent studying, at least not in this model. If you believe that intelligence increases with the time spent studying, then you would have to build a different model. And that's one thing about models, is they reflect the belief system of the person who designed the model. So here we have our exogenous variables, intelligence and extracurricular activities that do not depend on time spent studying. And every variable that's not exogenous is going to be endogenous. And endogenous just means it depends on the choice the person makes. So of course, the choice variable is always endogenous. And in this case, grades and opportunity cost are also endogenous because the value of grades you get depends on the person's choice at the time they spend studying. There's also our objective function, which is just what we're trying to maximize. And that's example number 1. Example number 2 is the classic economic example of maximizing our objective is utility by choosing our choice variables down here, which in this case are going to be the number of bananas and the number of chocolate bars that we choose to buy. And we're maximizing our utility. That's going to be our objective function subject to a constraint. And this constraint, just to interpret it really quickly, is the amount of money we spend has to be equal to the amount of money we have, where the amount of money we spend is just the price of bananas times the quantity of bananas we buy, plus the price of chocolate times the quantity of chocolate we buy. That's how much we spend. How much we have to spend is our amount of money. So our choice variables are always what are underneath the maximization sign. They're always what the decision maker has control over, and they appear in every single part of our model. The exogenous variables do not depend on the choices we make. So the prices of the 2 goods, those are exogenous, as is the amount of money we have to spend. Endogenous variables are all other variables, and these variables all depend on the choices we make of the number of bananas and number of chocolate bars to buy. Our objective function is, of course, utility. Our constraint is we can't spend more than we have. Example number 3 is the government's going to be our decision maker, and the government is deciding how much money to allocate toward 3 cities. The government's objective is to maximize welfare, which is basically collective utility of people. And the welfare depends on how much money each city gets. And it's subject to a constraint. The amount of money that each city gets has to be equal to the amount of money that the government brings in revenue through the tax rate times the total income of the citizens of the state. So our choice variables, as usual, are below the maximization sign. They're what the government's going to choose. How much money do you give each city in your state? And then the exogenous variables are the variables that do not depend on how much money we give to each city. So that's the tax rate and the income, the collective income for the state. Endogenous variables are all other variables, including welfare, which depends on the money we give each city. And our objective function is welfare, so this is a welfare maximization problem. And our constraint is it's basically a budget constraint for the government.